Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're going all the way to Cameroon.
Sounds interesting. What's our source material this time?
Well, we've got an episode of Droit de Réponse.
Droit de Réponse. Okay, I know that one.
It's a Sunday roundtable discussion show on Equinoxe TV.
Yeah, pretty lively. A lot of opinions flying around on that show.
And we're going to try to use this one episode to get a sense of what's happening in Cameroon right now.
So kind of like piecing together a puzzle, right?
Exactly. From politics and economics to social issues, we're going to try to understand Cameroon.
Sounds like a challenge. Let's dive in.
Okay, so the episode starts off, and they jump right into these devastating floods.
Oh, right. I heard about those in the news. Pretty bad, huh?
Yeah. The extreme north region was hit really hard, and they show these images of, like, bridges completely washed away.
Wow.
In the Sanaga maritime region. And you hear these stories of, thousands of people being displaced, facing serious health risks. And then they start talking about the Maga Dam situation.
The Maga Dam. What about it?
Well, it seems like it might be making things even worse.
Really? How so?
So there's this, artificial lake created by the dam.
Oh, okay.
And it's looming over this town.
Uh-oh.
And apparently the drainage system is struggling to cope with all the extra water.
I see. So there's like a buildup of pressure.
Exactly. Some of the panelists are even calling it a ticking time bomb.
That's not good.
No, it's not. And while the government has been sending trucks of supplies to help people...
Okay, good. At least they're doing something.
Well, the episode also shows a lot of criticism directed at the government. Like, one panelist was saying that they hadn't done enough dredging in the Maga Dam area.
Dredging. That's that thing where they, dig up the bottom of the lake or river, right?
Right, to make it deeper and allow more water to flow through.
I get it.
And this panelist was questioning if the funds that were allocated for this dredging were even used effectively.
Yeah, I see where they're going with that.
Like, did the money actually go where it was supposed to? And was the work actually done?
Yeah, that's a valid question.
Definitely. And it seems like, for some people, this crisis has really exposed some deeper issues with disaster preparedness and financial management in Cameroon.
Right. It's not just about reacting to the immediate problem, but also about being prepared and managing resources properly.
Exactly. And then it's interesting how this conversation about accountability in the face of the floods leads into the next big topic on the show.
Which is?
It's the anniversary of the arrest of a bunch of MRC activists.
MRC? Remind me, what's that?
That's the Movement for the Renaissance of Cameroon, an opposition political party.
Oh, right. Those were those protests back in 2020, right?
Yeah, exactly. 4 years on from those protests, some panelists are calling for the president to grant these activists clemency.
Clemency.
Yeah, basically like a pardon, especially since a UN working group has said that their detention is arbitrary.
Oh, wow. Arbitrary detention. That's a pretty serious accusation. So they're saying their imprisonment is basically unlawful.
Right, that it doesn't have any legal basis. But of course, not everyone on the panel agrees.
Oh, really? What are the other sides saying?
There are some who are very much for the judicial process to just be allowed to run its course.
I see. So let the courts decide.
Yeah. And some of them even say that if the president just intervenes, it'll undermine the whole rule of law.
Okay, yeah, that's a valid point.
And it's really interesting how this is all playing out right now.
What do you mean?
Well, right now, a Cameroonian is actually presiding over the UN General Assembly.
No kidding. So there's a lot of international attention on Cameroon right now.
Exactly. So there's this kind of tension between, the calls for stability inside the country and then how all of this looks to the rest of the world.
Yeah. With Cameroon being in the global spotlight right now, those optics matter.
Definitely. And the episode kind of leaves you wondering, is the president the key to resolving all of this?
That's a good question.
Or is that way too simplistic?
Right. Because there are so many other factors at play, right?
Exactly. But before we can really dig into that, the conversation takes another turn.
Where do they go next?
They start talking about hydroelectric dams. And this is something that seems to be on everyone's mind in Cameroon.
Dams? What's the big deal with dams?
Well, there's a lot of frustration with the cost overruns and delays.
Oh, that's never good. Big infrastructure projects, always going over budget and behind schedule.
It's a classic. But what's really interesting is that they focus on how so many dams are concentrated in one particular region.
Now, that raises some questions.
Yeah, about potential regional favoritism. Is one region benefiting more from these projects than others?
And how resources are allocated nationally.
It's like the elephant in the room, right?
Yeah.
You can almost feel the tension as they discuss why one region seems to benefit more than others. And here's what makes it even crazier. Cameroon could actually be a major power exporter.
Wait, really?
The episode points out that they could be selling electricity to their neighbors at a fraction of the cost those countries are paying now.
Wow, that's a huge opportunity.
Right, but instead, they're struggling to meet their own energy needs.
So what's going on?
That's the big question. Is it mismanagement, corruption, lack of investment in the right areas? The episode leaves you wondering why this potential just isn't being realized.
Yeah, that's a big discrepancy. Lots of potential, but not delivering.
Exactly. And this theme of, like, things not quite adding up continues as the episode goes to the final piece of this deep dive puzzle.
Okay, what's that?
It's Cameroon's suspension from the extractive industry's transparency initiative.
What's that?
It's called the EITI for short. It's this global standard for, like, transparency and accountability when it comes to managing oil, gas, and mineral resources.
Sounds important.
It is. And the fact that Cameroon's been suspended suggests that something's seriously wrong.
I see. So, like, they're not meeting those standards.
Exactly. The episode explains that to be reinstated, Cameroon has to do two things.
What are they?
They have to create a properly constituted EITI committee, and then they have to produce this conciliation report.
Conciliation report.
Yeah.
What's that about?
It basically details how revenues from the extractive industries are being managed. Like, where's the money going?
Oh, I get it. So it's all about making sure that the money from these resources is being accounted for.
Right, to make sure there's no funny business going on. But what's really fascinating is the debate surrounding the whole significance of this suspension.
Oh, interesting. So they're not all on the same page about it?
Not at all.
So some people are saying it's not a big deal while others are saying it is.
Yeah, like the government representative on the show tries to play it down.
What do they say?
They basically say it's just a technicality, like they just need to get the paperwork in order.
But if it's so simple, why haven't they done it already?
Right, that's what some of the other panelists are saying. They're like, if it's just paperwork, why were you suspended in the first place?
Yeah, that's a good point. It makes you wonder if there's more to it than they're letting on.
Exactly. Like, are they really committed to transparency, or are they just trying to avoid scrutiny?
It's like, are they just trying to look good for the international community without actually changing anything?
It's hard to say for sure, but it definitely raises some questions.
Yeah, it does. So we've got floods, potential mismanagement of funds, political prisoners, and now questions about transparency in extractive industries. Seems like there's a lot going on in Cameroon.
It's a pretty complex picture, right?
It is. And I think what's really striking is this disconnect between what the government says and what people are actually experiencing.
Yeah, like there's the official story, but then you hear from people on the ground and it's a different story.
Exactly. And that's what makes this episode of Droit de Réponse so interesting. You get to hear these different perspectives, and it gives you a better sense of what's really happening.
Okay, so let's go back to the EITI suspension for a minute.
Sure.
What were some of the specific things they were talking about?
Well, one of the panelists brought up the EITI committee.
The committee.
Yeah. Apparently, the way the government appointing people to the committee doesn't follow the EITI rules.
What rules?
The EITI has this multi-stakeholder model, which means that there should be representatives from civil society, companies, and the government.
So it's supposed to be balanced.
Exactly. But it seems like the government's appointments haven't been balanced, and that's a big reason why they were suspended.
Oh, I see. And what about that conciliation report? They kept mentioning that.
Right. So the EITI requires countries to track the payments that companies make to the government for oil, gas, and minerals.
Okay.
And then they have to compare that to the government's own records of how much money they've received.
So they make sure everything matches up.
Yeah, it's all about making sure the money is accounted for and that there's no corruption.
But Cameroon's report has been delayed and it's incomplete, so that's another problem.
I see. So it's not just a simple paperwork issue. It's about whether they're really committed to transparency and accountability.
Exactly. And that's a big question, right? Are they actually going to change things, or are they just going through the motions?
The show doesn't really give us an answer, but it definitely makes you think.
It does. As I was listening to this episode, it felt like we were seeing a country that's trying to figure out who they are.
Yeah, like they're trying to find their place in the world.
And they're facing all these challenges at the same time.
What's interesting is how these seemingly unrelated issues are actually all connected.
Like the floods, the political prisoners, the dam projects, the extractive industries.
Yes. They all come back to these fundamental questions of governance, accountability, and public trust.
And this episode gave us a glimpse into how those issues are playing out in Cameroon.
It did. And it left us with a question for you, the listener. What do you think? What kind of Cameroon do you envision? It's a really crucial time for Cameroon. And part of that is, Cameroon's got this young population
Right, a lot of young
who
people.
are more and more vocal.
Makes sense, they're the future.
This generation, they're connected globally,
Totally.
aware of what's happening in the rest of the world, and they want more from their leaders.
They're not just going to sit back and accept things the way they are.
Exactly. And, they've grown up seeing this gap between what Cameroon could be and the reality they're facing every day.
Like all that potential we talked about, but...
Right, the potential, but then, struggling with basic things.
Right.
And they're starting to ask why.
And this episode of Droit de Repulse, it kind of shows that.
Yeah, it's not just academics debating. It's real people really concerned about the future of their country.
And another thing that stood out to me is how they kept linking those internal problems to Cameroon's role on the world stage.
Yeah, that's really important. I mean, with a Cameroonian leading the UN General Assembly,
It's a big deal.
the whole world is watching.
Cameroon's in the spotlight, and everything they do or don't do matters more now.
Absolutely. It's like this episode gives us a peek behind the curtain,
Yeah, like we see the image,
the image they want to project.
the polished image they're trying to show to the world.
But we also hear people questioning if that image is real.
Like if it actually matches what's happening for most Cameroonians.
That's a huge tension.
Yeah.
Can Cameroon be a leader globally
Yeah.
when they're dealing with problems at home with, things like
Yeah,
this?
all those things we talked about, governance, transparency.
Accountability, exactly.
The episode doesn't give us easy answers,
No.
but it does make one thing really clear.
What's that?
The future of Cameroon. It's not going to be decided by a bunch of politicians in some room.
Right.
It's being decided right now
Yeah.
in these debates, in the streets, by everyday Cameroonians.
And that's why this deep dive has been so valuable, I think.
I agree.
We went beyond just the headlines.
We really tried to understand what's going on.
The forces that are shaping the country,
We talked about the floods, the political prisoners,
the dam projects, the extractive industries.
and whether Cameroon's really committed to transparency or if it's all just for show.
It's like this episode was a mini version of Cameroon itself.
Yeah, a snapshot of
Full of potential, facing
Yeah.
tough choices.
figuring out their place in the world.
And I think the biggest takeaway is this. The future of Cameroon is not set in stone.
Right.
It depends on the decisions being made today.
By people like you listening right now.
So as we wrap up, we want to leave you with this. Don't just listen.
Yeah.
Let this spark your own curiosity.
Yeah.
Learn more. Stay informed.
Get involved.
Yeah, engage in the issues that matter to you.
Help shape the future of Cameroon.
Because the story of Cameroon, it's still being written.
And it's a story we can all be a part of.